But again, the dissonance between the perceived value and sometimes the perception is not wrong. I'm dealing with a situation right now which is potentially incredibly valuable, but they needed about $1.6 billion to expand the business to a point where it could become profitable. And for a variety of reasons, they were not able to access that capital at this point in time. And so the thing is going for scrap value, which is a shame, but it doesn't mean that the differing perceptions of value are really all that different.
And I think from our perspective too, the earlier we get brought in, the better. But if, we have the opportunity to see from the time when the company, realizes they might have a problem, you can help message earnings appropriately. You can help message, the ongoing corporate announcements appropriately to when you get to that point, it, does become an education.
Hello there, M&A Advisor community. This is Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor's mission is to recognize achievements, provide thought leadership, and connect professionals in mergers and acquisitions for the purpose of improving your deal-making craft and accelerating your deal flow. We are so glad you're joining us for this insightful and inspiring podcast conversation curated for mergers and acquisitions professionals. Whether you're an aspiring deal maker, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the world of mergers and acquisitions, you'll find something valuable and relevant in our podcast. Our goal is to bring you the best insights, stories, and tips from the experts who've been there and done that, so you can learn from their successes and mistakes and take your deal-making skills to the next level. But before we dive into today's episode, we have a small favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast and find it useful, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribing to our M&A Alerts newsletter. You can find the links in the description below. This will help us reach more people like you and grow our community of M&A professionals. It will also let us know that you appreciate our work and want us to keep producing more quality content for you. Plus, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be in the loop with the latest trends in the M&A world to improve and accelerate your deal making. So please follow us. You are the reason we do what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. And now for today's podcast.
Our next session is with Greg Milmoe, whom you've already seen on stage this morning, shareholder Greenberg Traurig, and he'll be in conversation with Viveca Tress. She's managing director at Joele Frank, Wilkinson, Brimmer, and Catcher. And they are going to be discussing strategic communications and restructuring, from pre-filing rumors to stakeholder engagement. Please give them a welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Greg, for joining me and for doing this. Like she said, I'm Viveca. I'm a managing director at Joele Frank. And for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a strategic communications firm. So hence why we're here to discuss communications. Greg had his introduction, but many of you, I'm sure, know him as well. And as a lawyer, he's worked with people like me a lot. So generally in these sorts of transactions, communications, might be the last to be brought in, sometimes never brought in. And I might be biased, but I think we're one of the most important elements of a successful outcome in any sort of restructuring or restructuring adjacent situation. And I think one of the most successful, situations depends also on a closely coordinated advisor team and in between the communications lawyers, financial advisors, restructuring advisors. So, Greg, how do you see kind of the interplay of those teams, and how have you seen it go right or wrong? No.
I think the microphone isn't working so well, so I'll shout. I think to put things in context, first we need. I'll stop shouting. Even better. We need to focus on whether we're talking about a public company or a private company, and then we'll get into a subspecies of company that is in bankruptcy. Public companies are governed by disclosure obligations set forth in the Securities and Exchange Act and regulations promulgated thereunder, and they are excruciatingly detailed and very much formed and focused on stockholder information, full, fair, effective disclosure. William O. Douglas, who was the third chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission up until 1939, went on the bench, and after a few years as a Supreme Court justice, contrasted SEC disclosure and bankruptcy disclosure, characterizing SEC disclosure as pettifogging, meandering, and useless. I never had the chance to ask him how he really felt about it. A brief anecdote: when I was a young securities lawyer, I was sent off to West Virginia representing an investment bank doing an IPO, and we didn't have Zoom back then, so we had a conference call before we got on a plane and headed down. And the company said, so tell me about this prospectus. What's on a prospectus? And I said, well, the first page, it has the company name, the number of shares, the price per share, and of course the SEC legend. What's the SEC legend? Well, these securities have neither been approved nor disapproved by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and any representation to the contrary is a criminal offense. Well, you can't put that on our prospectus. What do you crazy people think we're crooks? We have people who've invested in us. And I sort of calmed down and said, well, yeah, every IBM, every company has to have this legend. It's the law. They said, well, okay. We got down to Clarksburg the next day in my three-piece Wall Street suit, and there was a stack of draft prospectuses, and sure enough, company name, shares, securities have not been approved or disapproved. However, the Reverend Jeters has blessed our program. We will strike oil. Obviously they were having fun with the New York jerk. But the distinction being that the SEC disclosure, however useful it is for well-positioned, functioning companies, is inadequate to describing or helping a company that is in trouble or on the cusp of being in trouble. Private companies don't have the same sort of overview from the regulatory perspective, and therefore are more accustomed to speaking more directly with their customers, sometimes their investors, but are much easier, find it much easier to talk turkey about things and to work things out. Having grown up as a corporate lawyer, and many of the public companies that ended up in bankruptcy were being advised by people who had grown up as securities lawyers, we were focused on the public disclosure, the public disclosure, the public disclosure, and we were utterly ignorant about the whole other panoply of constituents with whom communication was essential. And so, thank God, Joele came along, some other early pioneers, and figured out how and what to say and how to say it to assist a company that is finding itself in dire straits. So what I do is I pick up the phone and I say, Viveca, you got some time to help us out at XYZ company? And Viveca says, sure. And then what do you do?
Well, and yes, thank you. And I think an interesting thing you touched upon is how emotional this can be for companies. So we, in addition to, strategic communicators, we often find ourselves in the role of, therapist for a lot of executives. So after we get brought in, we try to quickly get up to speed and learn what's happening, learn the realities of the situation. And, we try to, a couple things at the outset is ensure that, we're reinforcing that there's, a business being run. This is ordinary course most of the time, at least until the announcement's happening. We want to be sure we're preserving credibility of management. We want to be sure we're preserving credibility of the company with all stakeholders, and then, minimizing the misunderstanding that's happening, and ensuring that we're communicating with, like you said, all stakeholders, not just the public stakeholders, because we do this a lot both for public and private companies. And, we often find that, like you said, companies are very emotional. They want to communicate to their employees. They want to communicate to their customers. Sometimes they want to over communicate. So we help them come up with, a strategic game plan, communications rollout, and approach to all the different audiences who often need, different types of outreach, different types of messaging, just ensuring that it's coordinated across all audiences. And we've seen it go wrong. We've seen it where we've assumed that, a company will take what we have and roll it out. And then a day after announcement, their senior leaders are saying, what am I supposed to say to my customers? And, you say, well, we gave you this tool and you just didn't use it. So it's ensuring all audiences across the board are prepared, equipped. Go ahead.
Viveca, I'm shocked to hear you suggest that a client doesn't take advice.
Yeah.
That's a new and startling insight. Okay, lawyers will take care, or will try to take care of balancing for public companies the SEC required disclosures. But, I haven't paid 150 vendors for the last 3 months. I've been stringing them along. We just don't have the cash. My employees are calling and telling me, what do I say to these people? I told them last month that they'd get the check next month. Then they said, well, it'll be any day now. And they're running out of patience. They're refusing to ship. They're starting to talk about lawsuits. What do I say to these people?
Yeah. And it's a tough situation. And a lot of times our job is also getting companies comfortable with the uncomfortable, because not to blame the lawyers, but, there's only so much we can say in these situations. And we find good ways, I think, to communicate around the guidelines that we're given. But, we try to provide reassurances where we can. And as I'm sure everyone's familiar, sometimes they're just not reassurances that can be given depending on a situation. Or like you said, they're in a very sticky spot where they haven't been paying vendors and they might not be paying vendors. So it's trying to bridge the gap between when we get to the announcement and when we can maybe provide reassurances because some sort of deal has been announced, or because, you're in court and, you actually have the ability to pay post petition or whatever it is. So there's, it's just kind of acting as that sort of, builder between all audiences. So it's
well, buffer and common sense often are useful. How often have we heard the expression and never use the B word? I don't have a B problem. We're just a little tight on our covenants last quarter and the quarter before that, and we don't have any cash, but we don't have a B problem. When we talk about this, we sometimes analogize, unfortunately, to cancer. And that is, the earlier that you recognize that there's a problem and face up to dealing with it, the much more likely it is that you will be able to generate a positive outcome. Viveca, what's the phrase you use about rather having a first shot than a catch up?
Yeah, I'm not sure if yeah. That's what
it was something about it's easier, much easier to make a good first impression than to try to be out there saying, well, what my client really meant by that was something really and completely different. I've been in situations with you guys and with other other firms where you have literally come in with 10 or 12 or 14 people to do a call center. Is that, in your experience, before bankruptcy, after bankruptcy? How does that work?
Yeah, so the call centers, we usually have those post announcement, and we'll work closely with the claims agent, and we kind of act as a liaison with the claims agent in those situations, and provide them with all of the messaging, the tools, the coordination they need to help in those, especially very consumer facing companies, retail companies, or companies that you said with lots of vendor problems, because the vendors are also very big users of the call center. And we find in those situations it helps companies manage, the leadership team or the procurement, coordinator at the company have a lot of other things they need to work on. They can't necessarily be taking every call from every constituent, and those call centers can really help, lessen some of the burden on.
The thing
companies.
that's remarkable here is that we are talking about dealing with different constituents, just like it's normal and perfect, not with stockholders, not with bondholders, not necessarily with just creditors. Part of the value added by bringing in somebody early is to identify who you need to talk to. Not every company requires that you deal massively with employees. Not everybody requires a blanket statement to creditors. Again, you have much greater freedom when you're under the auspices of a bankruptcy court to communicate facts out to people, and indeed use the call centers to communicate. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a bankruptcy lawyer is explain or try to explain to a retiree why his medical benefits, which he's been counting on, are just, I'm sorry, not going to be there anymore. What do you mean they're not going to be there? Well, assessing that there is going to be that kind of a problem, and once you identify the problem, you can start figuring out ways to deal with it, both legally. We heard this wonderful presentation on the use of trusts, more as a post bankruptcy and litigation survival. But there are also funding mechanisms you can legitimately come up with, if you think about it ahead of time, that will provide answers to these kinds of questions. What's the hardest kind of thing that you all have encountered?
I think, like you said, I think the hardest thing is when a company is, in that position where the employee base in particular is going to be massively impacted. And then that, like I was saying, is a very emotional experience for companies. They care about their employees. They want to do right by them. It can be difficult to do that. And so one of the things we do, as you were alluding to, is we come in, we try to identify all those stakeholders, the levels of employees. Sometimes it's not just a employee-wide blanket statement that covers everyone. There could be different types of employees, people getting keeps or curbs, people who are potentially continuing in some form with whatever the company is going to look like, and just making sure that those employees, whatever the situation is, do feel like they're valued and they're important. And even if there's tough things that are happening, and the situation that I mentioned where people felt like they didn't have the resources that were given to them, it was kind of going back, finding new ways to get them the information so they felt like they were appreciated and like we were helping them through what might potentially be a difficult process.
We just listened to Wilbur Ross, who was a master of communications. I was teasing him that he was able to consummate the Trump Taj Mahal deal back when the president was merely the Donald by putting an absolute bottom last line offer on the table and then scheduling a TV press conference in order to announce that offer. And of course, Mr. Trump took the bait and said what a great deal it was and how wonderful it all was. We have a robust minute and 13 seconds to address questions or concerns that may be floating around out there. And
Yeah, go. Oh, did I see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Growing old, I can't see and I can't hear. Were you talking about valuation?
Let me just make sure the difference in communicating for, like, if there's a long tail for announcement, or if it's
It's a little bit more with the ownership where there's some denial on the valuation in some of these tech companies versus some of the industrial companies, and how you kind of communicate that and strategies around that.
Yeah, Viveca, it's a thing we were talking about, that
Yeah.
the dichotomy between what we're talking about earnings per share. That kind of announcement is going to do incredible damage to our earnings per share. Excuse me, sir, but you've got $223 million of creditors who you haven't paid. Shouldn't we focus on those issues first? It's a process. It's an evolution. I'm old enough to remember dealing with private equity firms that were never, ever going to have a portfolio company go into bankruptcy. And then KKR did. And then pretty soon the mantra switched, and it was, unless you have at least one bankruptcy in your portfolio, you're not trying hard enough. But again, the dissonance between the perceived value, and sometimes the perception is not wrong. I'm dealing with a situation right now which is potentially incredibly valuable, but they needed about $1.6 billion to expand the business to a point where it could become profitable. And for a variety of reasons, they were not able to access that capital at this point in time. And so the thing is going for scrap value, which is a shame, but it doesn't mean that the differing perceptions of value are really all that different.
And I think from our perspective too, the earlier we get brought in, the better. But if, we have the opportunity to see from the time when the company, realizes they might have a problem, you can help message earnings appropriately. You can help message, the ongoing corporate announcements appropriately to when you get to that point. It does become an education. It does become a mindset shift, hopefully, getting them where they are comfortably announcing what they have to announce.
Viveca, I'm hearing the get off the stage music in my earpiece.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think it's thank you, everyone.
very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new from it. If you have any questions or comments for us or any of our guests, please feel free to leave them in the podcast platform of your choice, or send us an email at editor@maadvisor.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts newsletter at the links in the description or on our website at www.maadvisor.com. This will help you stay updated on the latest M&A interviews and trends, and support our podcast to grow and reach more listeners like you. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and founder of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay safe and happy dealing.